Hello, and welcome back to our podcast. I'm the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
We're going to pick up this week and continue talking about execution and torture methods that have been used throughout history. Last week we talked about several methods that were still being used today, and a few that had been used throughout history. We're going to continue talking about some of the ones that are no longer used and have been used at different times throughout history. The first one we're going to talk about is called the breaking wheel. This is also known as the execution wheel or the wheel of Catherine. It was used for torture and for public execution, primarily in Europe. It was used different times throughout the Middle Ages up to the 19th century. It was used for usually for people who were like murderers, rapists, traitors, and robbers, but could be used, for whoever if the mood struck. So this method is, as you can imagine, pretty brutal. So basically what it is they would take a prisoner and they would take them to this scaffold in the middle of town, and they would tie them down where they couldn't move. Then they would take a wooden wheel that was normally used on like a cart or a carriage, and it often had an iron rim around it, and sometimes they would also add a rectangular iron thrust to amplify the damage, just in case the wooden wheel didn't give enough. So basically what they would do was to try to cause as much mutilation and agony as they could initially. So basically they would take this wheel and they would first start by breaking the leg bones. They would essentially just take this wheel up and just slam it down on someone's legs repeatedly until it was pretty much just pulverized. And they would do the same to their arms as well.
Well, that sounds pleasant.
Oh yeah, it's very pleasant. Once they had done this, they would take the person and basically braid them into the wooden wheel, and then they would hang the wheel up in what would basically be something like a crucifixion, where they would erect it on a master pole and just leave the person to die. Or in some cases, they would take mercy on them and they would be permitted to be decapitated, which, yay.
Yep.
I guess after I had been mutilated to that point, I don't know.
I would welcome the quick death.
I guess I would too, to be honest, but yeah, it does not sound nice at all. So, if they didn't take mercy on you, you could pretty much imagine what would happen. Because you were just left out in the open, it pretty much left you open to animals and birds, whatever pretty much wanted to come and pick on your body.
Not only that, but the standard crucifixion stuff, you would be so exhausted that you wouldn't be able to hold yourself up, which would cause you to lean forwards, which would put so much pressure on your chest so that way you couldn't breathe.
Right. Well, this would be a little different because you're pretty much mutilated at this point, so you couldn't do anything anyway. And I couldn't even imagine seeing someone braided into a wooden wheel. I couldn't even imagine what that would look like, nor would I want to see it. But I guess this was big entertainment back in the day. The next method we're going to talk about is burning. Now, there's several different methods that were used to accomplish this. One of the most well-known would be, of course, burning someone at the stake. And as you can imagine, this was not pleasant in any way whatsoever. They would basically take someone, tie them to a stake, and put wood around the outside of their body and different things, and just light it aflame. And you would just slowly die. You might die. If you were lucky, you might pass out from smoke inhalation, but since this was usually done outside, that was not necessarily the case. So you would pretty much feel everything, and I couldn't even imagine how much pain this would cause, because I've had very simple burns before, and they are excruciating. So to literally be lit aflame, I couldn't even imagine. Another method that was used was molten metal, which would basically be where they would melt metal, of course, until it was liquefied, and then they would pretty much just pour it down your throat.
Fun.
This was something that was done by the Romans very often. There's, a lot of people who were executed in this manner, but oh my goodness, it sounds awful.
It sounds like you'd be melted slowly from the inside.
Pretty much. I mean, I don't know if your body would go into shock on some of these methods, and maybe you wouldn't feel as much of the pain as you think you would, but I couldn't imagine that you wouldn't feel some. I mean, this has got to be horrific. Another method that was used is called the brazen bull, which this is basically just a huge iron bull statue. And they would put you inside it and then light a flame or fire underneath it and pretty much just roast you alive. In other words, cook you. Another fun thing for this is often that they would put something inside the bull so that when you screamed, it would sound like the bull making mooing noises or noises where it didn't actually sound like you were screaming, just to make it more entertaining for those around, I suppose. But I don't really know why that would be the case. It seems stupid. When
People
you think
back then had a sick sense of entertainment.
They obviously did. I mean, this was stuff that people actually went out and enjoyed watching in some cases. Now, I suppose you can think about that this was the time and it was considered normal, so I suppose if you didn't know any different, it would be okay, I suppose, but I couldn't even imagine wanting to go watch this stuff, but people did it all the time. It's just like the public hangings. It was a big time, and people thought it was fun for some reason.
Actually, if you think about it, people still do attend executions.
Oh, of course they do in different parts of the country and stuff, and even in the U.S., like people who are being put in the electric chair, for instance, they have that room where people can sit and watch and stuff, and they get to say their last words if they want to and stuff. I could see doing that, I guess, if it was someone who had done something to maybe someone I loved, wanting to see them suffer too. I guess I could see it from that point of view. But just going out to watch it just for entertainment, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for all of us who had to read The Crucible in high school, we probably all have heard of this method, and it's called crushing. Now, this method, as you can imagine, is, easy on the eyes because, there's not much blood, I guess, but pretty much what they would do is they would lay you down either on the ground or on a table or something, and they would place another, wooden slab or something on top of you, and then they would just start stacking rocks on you. Now, they did this a lot, as in the Crucible during the Salem witch trials. They would pretty much just keep adding that weight to you until you could no longer take a breath. And for all of us who read The Crucible, we can remember one of the most famous deaths, and that was Giles Corey when he died, and his last words were "more weight," because he would not say that he was a witch, and that's what they were trying to get him to do. And even if he did, they would have continued and went on and killed him anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But he wouldn't, of course. But yeah, this is something that sounds like it would be awful as well, because you can breathe for a while and then slowly your chest is compressed to the point where it can't expand anymore. I couldn't imagine even going through that. I can't even imagine smothering. That just the thought of having my air cut off is not good. But that was another method that was used. The next method we're going to talk about is disembowelment. Now, this is also known as visceration or gutting. And as you can imagine, this is pretty similar to gutting a fish or something like if you're a hunter and you kill a deer or something. A lot of people do that. And it's basically what you think it is. It's pretty much just the removal of the organs. So they would pretty much just cut you across the abdomen and just start pulling everything out. Because things were still sort of connected inside your body, this could be a very slow and painful way to die, as you can imagine.
Sounds pleasant for both parties.
It does. And I couldn't even imagine doing this to a person as an executioner. I can't even imagine the mindset that you would need to be in to be an executioner to be able to perform these kind of things. But yeah, evidently that wasn't ever an issue, because I don't think that I've ever heard of people ever having any issues finding people willing to do this. And I guess it was, as we said last week, a good time to be a serial killer, because you could legally kill as many people as you wanted, as brutally as you wanted, with no consequences. Which, yay for them, I guess. Another method that goes way back in history, as you can imagine, is drowning. Now, there was all different ways that this could be accomplished, and one of the ways we talked about last week with the Romans would, they would tie you into a sack with animals and basically just throw you into a body of water and then let the animals claw at you as well, just to cause even more pain and suffering during that time. But of course there was all different kinds of methods that they could use. Sometimes they would just dunk them into something, or just hold their head underwater, or just throw them into a body of water for people who couldn't swim and just let them drown. Now, if you live back in the time of King Edward III, which was around 1352, and you were convicted of high treason, you may get to be hanged and drawn and quartered. Now, this is an absolutely horrible method. Basically, they would take someone and they would hang them almost to the point of death. Then, if you were a man, you were emasculated, and for all of us, right? And if all of us don't know what that means, you can imagine that's pretty much castration. Then they would disembowel you, and then behead you, and then quarter the body up. Now, luckily, if you were a woman, you didn't have to go through that, and you got to be burned at the stake. I don't really know which one would be worse. They both sound pretty bad, but it does sound a little worse on the guys. And that is a absolutely ridiculous punishment if you think about for just treason, because you got to think about this time, and treason might not actually be what they did. In other words, there were a lot of people who were very wrongfully convicted during this time. I mean, there was a lot of things that were considered treason that are absolutely ridiculous, in today's standards. But,
for example, just talking bad about the kingdom.
Exactly.
Complaining about taxes.
It could be anything. I mean, a lot of things could be considered that. I mean, you had to really toe the line back in those days.
Literally anything negative you say about any, member of the royal family or the kingdom itself would be considered treason.
It could be, yes. And it could be just someone had a grudge against you and could report it, and in some cases, they would just roll with it. They wouldn't even investigate, and really, how could they prove it unless you were out on the street corner, yelling it out or something. So you could just not even do anything and just be accused of it, and that's all it took.
And God forbid you make an enemy of a member of the royal family.
Exactly. There's no telling what they might do to you in those cases. I mean, it could probably even be worse.
Probably.
Oh, yeah, because, they had... England back in those days and things like that, they had some pretty rough, just pure torture methods. They were very well known for this. Things like the Iron Maiden and all those types. They were bad. It was bad. So, another method that has been used, since ancient times, pretty much as long as there's been people, is something called falling. Now, as to why they call it falling, I'm not really sure, because basically what it is they take you up to a great height, usually something like a cliff or something, and just throw you off of it. But I guess to make it sound better and make them feel better about themselves, they call it falling. So I guess, be careful around cliffs, because, you don't want to trip and fall. But anyway, yeah. The next method is called flaying. And this is pretty much just when they try to remove the entire skin. Now, they tried to do this while keeping the skin intact.
Yeah.
As much as possible. Now, why
treating it as an animal pelt,
right.
Pretty much.
Now, why that would matter, I have no idea. I mean, it doesn't seem like me like it would matter one way or another. If somebody's cutting your skin off, I guess you could really care less if it stays in one piece or not. And what they did with the skin makes you wonder. Because, who knows? And maybe they kept it as a trophy. I don't know. But, oh my God. I guess you'd have to be pretty good, though, to cut a person, and skin them and keep the skin intact. So, I guess you can give them kudos for that anyway. They got to be pretty handy with a knife anyway to be able to do that. But that's something else that I could never imagine doing to someone. Now, that is absolutely just disgusting to think about, but it was definitely something that's been used for a while, and it is horrific to even imagine. I mean,
yes, it is.
Even stomach turning just to imagine it doing it, and imagine the body afterwards, seeing it with everything kind of exposed. Ugh, that is just disgusting.
It just makes me think of the Blood Eagle now.
Right. Now that was what we talked about last week, and oh my goodness, that one was horrible because many people would stay alive during that, even though their lungs had been pulled out of their body. I'm sure you would probably go into shock, but still you would be alive through a great portion of these types of methods.
Which is why they used them.
Right.
Cause max amount of suffering.
Exactly. You would suffer a great deal with almost any of them. Another method that was used, and this one was especially known to like Vlad the Impaler, and it's impalement. So basically what they would do is set someone up on something sharp, a piece of wood, it could be metal, it could be a pole, a spike, a stake, whatever, and pretty much just let gravity take over at that point.
What makes it worse is they would typically do it up the butt.
Yeah, exactly. Or in the perineum, which is pretty much the space between, which, who cares? I mean, it would still rip everything.
It's still very bad.
Exactly.
And very painful.
Exactly. Now, as those who know Vlad, he was supposed to have actually sat around while this was happening, and he had a table outside, supposedly, and would sit around and watch this happening while he was eating dinner. Which, I couldn't think of anything more appetizing to have going on around me. I mean, that really sets my stomach, up for wanting some food. But that's probably where some of the rumors came into play, where he was, a vampire. That's where, we've heard that, Vlad, supposed to be the vampire, the first vampire. Yeah,
there were rumors of him being a cannibal.
Right, a cannibal. And
he would actually drink the blood of the people.
Exactly, he would supposedly drink the blood. Now, whether or not this ever actually happened, who knows? I mean, because this was a very long time ago, and we're just going by what people say they saw. And I can imagine just seeing bodies impaled and heads on spikes would be enough to add for a lot of overinflating of stories, so to speak. So, he may not have did all that, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't doubt he didn't, to be honest, considering if he was bad enough to be wanting to eat dinner while that was going on. Yeah, so that was absolutely horrible, but yeah, he apparently enjoyed that quite a lot. So another method, this is a maritime method, which would be like if you were a sailor or something, and it's called keel hauling. So basically what they would do is they would take someone and then basically just drag them up and down the side against the barnacles on the ship. Now,
Jesus Christ.
Right.
I've heard of this one. It's very bad.
It is. Now, as you can imagine, if you have never saw these barnacles, these are stuff you got to scrape off. They are hard. So it would be pretty much like scraping somebody up and down against a grater or something. So you're just grating them up. And this was also something that, of course, would take a while to happen.
A lot of times they would die on the first go-around, but if they didn't either get shredded to death or drowned to death, because they would typically do it on the water, they would just send them around again for even more pain. Right.
They would keep going until pretty much they died or there was nothing left.
Yeah.
So it was not a good time to be alive. Definitely not. Another method that's been used since ancient times is poisoning. And, of course, this can be accomplished by, several means. They used all different kinds of poisons and everything like that. One of the most famous deaths was like the death of Socrates, where he was supposed to have died by drinking an infusion of hemlock. And it was used as a form of execution. Of course, it was also something that was used, during times where, like, people who were trying to overthrow someone or something like that as well. So, I mean, it could also be something that could be considered, a treasonous act as well, because it was also used for things like that. So, and it's still used today, technically, but, I mean, it's not an actual method, right, that's, an actual execution method, but you hear about it all the time. People still today poisoning others, and, there are, as you can think, there are many ways to accomplish it.
Yep. And many untraceable ways.
Exactly. There are, methods that, that people get away with it. I mean, all the time. I mean, I've saw many a documentary where it's been several years down the road where they might do it to someone else and they finally catch them, and then they go back and exhume bodies and find arsenic and all kinds of things, in a body. So it's something that is used still today. The next method is called sawing. Now, this could be done in a few different ways. So basically, they could either saw you in half at the waist, which was, like if you, the magician way, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or they could start between your legs and just pretty much saw straight up the middle of your body through the top of your head.
I think I prefer the other way.
I think I would too, because neither one sound good, but the straight up through the body, it absolutely sounds horrible, and I couldn't imagine how long that would take for someone to die.
You would definitely die quicker the other way.
You would definitely bleed out much faster. And what kind of saw would they be using for this? I mean, just
it'd have to be something pretty strong to cut through the spine.
It would. It would have to be pretty, it would have to be not your common saw. So, just thinking about it.
An extra large bone saw.
Oh, yeah. I guess that would be another method they could use. Another method is called slow slicing. Now, this is, I guess, similar-ish to sawing, except this method was usually executed and they tried to extend it as long as possible over a large period of time. They would take a knife and basically just slowly start cutting off pieces of your body.
The good old death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
Classic.
That is another method. So you can imagine if it's called death by 1,000 cuts, how long it most likely took some people to die, because I'm pretty sure they didn't throw that term around lightly.
Probably not.
No. And just thinking about that. Another thing that they can use, that we've probably seen and heard about, like in the pit and the pendulum, is of course a pendulum. Now that would be, where they suspend a blade, or sometimes a machine that had an axe head on it. One of the two. It wouldn't be more of the traditional pendulum like we're thinking of. And it would just slowly swing over you and just come down and start slicing into you. Now you can think, that wouldn't be so bad, it's going to cut me in half pretty quickly. But no, it slowly cuts down into your body.
Reminds me of the House of Usher.
Yes,
or the fall
exactly.
of the House of Usher.
Right. So, oh my God.
Very good show, by the way. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it was definitely good. Another method that we mentioned earlier is crucifixion. Now, I know we've all most likely heard of that. Basically, they would take you and, of course, nail you to a wooden cross or sometimes a tree, and just leave you there. Some people were lucky, I guess to say they were lucky in that they might die a little more quickly. In some cases, they might stab them and things like that, where they would bleed out a little faster. But if not, then you were just left. You could, eventually, as we said earlier, your body would start sliding forward. And because you don't have anything to hold you up, you're just supporting your whole body, you would expand your chest cavity to the point where you could no longer breathe. So that's how they think a lot of people died during that time, during crucifixion. But it could also be dehydration, animals coming to have their fill, so to speak, birds, anything, because you're just right out in the open.
And that just makes me think of Prometheus.
Yeah.
Because the bird pecking out his liver
Exactly,
and all that.
Exactly. It would be pretty bad. Another thing they did was sometimes they would take a cage and they would hang you up outside in this cage and just leave you there to die from whatever happened. Either starvation, which I'm going to think you're probably going to die from dehydration before starvation, as you can imagine. But at the same time, does it really matter? That would be awful.
It would be very painful and very agonizing either way.
And you're out in the elements, so if it was like winter or something, or even summer, just excruciatingly hot, where you could get in no shade, no relief, no water, no food, and you're just sitting there in this cage for everyone to do whatever.
Either one of those in Alabama, that would be hell.
Oh, God, yes. It would be awful. And I couldn't even imagine in some of the colder places if they did that.
Oh,
Good
no.
God. Another way that they could do was basically, and this is also mentioned by Edgar Allan Poe in some of his wonderful stories, where they would just take you and brick you into a wall or something, just wall you into like a structure where you couldn't get out. You're behind this wall. They would often tie them up or, even chain them to the walls and just leave them there. So it'd be pretty much the same, except you wouldn't be outside in the elements, so I guess you got that going for you. But other than that,
you'd still die of dehydration.
Right. You would still suffer for a great long while before you finally met your end. I'm trying to think which one of these methods would be the best. I don't really think I like any of these old methods.
I'd rather be sawed in half.
I guess I would too. I guess if I had no other choice of none of these. I don't know, maybe poisoning if they gave me something that maybe...
There are plenty of poisons that don't really cause much pain.
Right. Maybe if it was just something that just kind of made you maybe a little sick and then you died, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. But I can't imagine any of these being too pleasant. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and close out this week and pick up next week, and we're going to talk about all the different torture methods that have been used throughout history, including psychological torture methods. So that's going to be very fun. So we definitely invite you to come back next week and join us for that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to stay disturbed.